During a mutual manipulation with her boss, Zhong Yi developed feelings for him. The boss is about to get married, but still refuses to let go of her commission. She can tolerate a lot, but not when it comes to her money. So Zhong Yi decides it's time to go all out. Nights are usually quiet, but not in this hotel room. After all the intensity subsides, Zhong Yi sits up. "Do you want some water?" she asks while turning on the bedside lamp, glancing at the man behind her.
Sure.
"I have a girlfriend now, and I'm getting married next month," he suddenly says just as Zhong Yi is about to get out of bed. Her body stiffens. Although the room isn't cold, Zhong Yi feels as though a chilling breeze just swept across her back, leaving her cold from the inside out. "You should have told me earlier, Mr. Sun." Zhong Yi hands him a bottle of water. "Are you mad?" Sun Yanzhou raises his eyes to meet hers. This man always does this. No matter how hurtful his words, his gaze remains focused and tender, making it hard for Zhong Yi to blame herself for falling for him. "No, not at all." Zhong Yi smiles after a few seconds of silence. "If you had told me earlier, I wouldn't have come. No need to make your girlfriend feel wronged." "So you are mad." Sun Yanzhou reaches out to pull her back. "I'm going to freshen up." Zhong Yi casually dodges his touch. After walking a few steps, she pauses. "Should I quit my jobs? We're both adults. Is that necessary?" Sun Yanzhou throws the question back at her. Zhong Yi doesn't respond. The man puts on his shoes and gets out of bed, hugging her from behind, his voice filled with amusement. "Everyone in the advertising industry knows you, Miss Zhong, are the star salesperson at Jusheng. And getting married is just something arranged by my family. Nothing will change between us. I'm just letting you know so you won't take it too seriously." So this was Sun Yanzhou's plan all along.
Surprised?
Not really. Zhong Yi wasn't too shocked. Still, her heart did feel a slight, sharp pain. She felt exhausted and didn't want to continue discussing it. After cleaning up, she quietly got dressed and left the hotel. It was almost dawn. Zhong Yi remembered a popular saying online: "If you ever feel exhausted, just look at a certain place at 4 a.m. It's exactly 4 a.m. She tilts her head, looking at the faint stars barely visible in the sky. After a while, she smiled. Sun Yanzhou was right. They are both adults, and it really doesn't matter. But at the end of the day, she was still a woman. She had compromised too many times, and this time, she didn't want to compromise anymore. The next day, Zhong Yi put on a full face of makeup, donned her so-called battle attire, and painted her lips a bold red before walking into Sun Yanzhou's office. "Mr. Sun," Zhong Yi said in a strictly business-like tone, "thank you and the company for your help, but due to personal career development, I've decided to resign. Please arrange the handover procedures as soon as possible." As she spoke, she placed a printed resignation notice on Sun Yanzhou's desk. Sun Yanzhou pushed the paper back. He glanced at the closed door and lowered his voice. "Zhong Yi, I told you, nothing will change." "Maybe not," Zhong Yi responded calmly, "but I still believe that leaving would be better for both of us." "You're a heartless woman," Sun Yanzhou chuckled, stepping forward to lightly place his hands on her shoulders, his warm breath brushing past her ear. "I know you're tired. How about this? I'll give you a week off to rest, and we can talk about everything else later." After that, Sun Yanzhou walked a few steps away and opened the door. Zhong Yi knew this man well enough to understand that this conversation was over for today. So she nodded and walked out. She drove for an hour back to her parents' home, just in time for lunch. "What brings you back all of a sudden?" her mother asked, surprised. "There's not much food left at home. How about I make some fish? I'll go downstairs to buy one." She started taking off her apron as she spoke. "No need, I'm fine with anything." Zhong Yi stopped her. "How can that be? Everything here is bland and doesn't suit your taste," her mother insisted. Zhong Yi didn't argue further. Sometimes, she felt more and more like a guest in this home. But from her parents' perspective, they felt like they owed her. If she didn't let them do things for her, they would feel even more guilty. Zhong Yi sat down at the dining table and noticed 2 sets of chopsticks laid out. Her father was surely at work, so aside from her mother, could her younger brother be home? Realizing this, Zhong Yi's heart sank. She quickly opened the door to the small bedroom. Sure enough, 16-year-old Zhong Sheng was lying on the bed, his face slightly flushed. "Big sis, you're back?" Zhongsheng struggled to sit up, forcing a smile. "Are you feeling unwell?" Zhongyi walked quickly to his side and felt his forehead. "When did you start running a fever? Why didn't Mom call me?" "It's nothing, just a little cold. I took some medicine, and I'm feeling better. I didn't want Mom to tell you because I know you're already working so hard. I'm always a burden to you." Zhongyi's hand paused for a moment. She used to resent her younger brother and her parents for having a second child so late in life, at nearly 40. But Zhongsheng's maturity tugged at her heartstrings. "Why say that? I'm your sister, and you're my brother." Zhongyi ruffled his hair. "Are you sure you don't need to go to the hospitals? Let me tell you, Zhongsheng, in this family, we don't hold back when it comes to being sick. Don't act like you're unloved and pitiful." After she finished speaking, the two of them looked at each other and burst into laughter. Zhongyi's decision to become a saleswoman in the advertising industry ultimately stemmed from Zhongsheng. That year, Zhongyi was in her senior year, studying advertising design at the best school, and had already secured a spot for graduate school. Her teachers believed that with Zhongyi's abilities and insight, as long as she completed her graduate studies smoothly, her future would be extremely promising. But then Zhongsheng fell ill. He fainted in class, was taken to the hospital, and was eventually diagnosed with acute systemic lupus erythematosus. It quickly led to kidney failure, and the only cure was a kidney transplant. The Zhong family was an ordinary family living in the outskirts of Jin City. Their mother had retired early due to diabetes, and the family's main source of income was their father's monthly salary of less than 6,000 yuan. There was no way they could afford the surgery, let alone the lifelong medication that would follow. "Mom, give up on me," Zhongsheng pleaded through tears from his hospital bed. He was only 12 at the time, a bright, handsome boy who loved basketball and singing. He would even save his pocket money to buy thoughtful birthday gifts for his sister. Zhongyi couldn't utter a single word. That night, she stood on the rooftop for a long time. In the end, she wiped her eyes and sent a message to her advisor, giving up her graduate school placement. The fall recruiting season had already ended, so Zhongyi applied to every advertising company she could find, with a clear goal in mind: sales only. Once, an interviewer asked her why, with her excellent design skills, she didn't consider a creative role. Zhongyi's response was that she needed money, lots of it. Sales offered more flexibility and income. As long as she was willing to work hard, there would always be more opportunities. And so, Zhongyi joined the advertising company. The company was a subsidiary of a state-owned enterprise, not the biggest, nor the most well-known in the industry. But it had one key advantage: it never withheld sales commissions. For Zhongyi, that was enough. What could be more lovable than money? Money was Zhongsheng's lifeline. For that reason alone, Zhongyi had every justification to make it her top priority. What she never expected was that after nearly 4 years of hard work, someone would grab her weak spot and use her commissions to manipulate her. And that person was the only one she had ever secretly loved. Zhongyi took 3 days off but returned early when a client's budget issue arose. After accompanying the client to dinner and a follow-up meeting, it was nearly midnight by the time everything was resolved. "Where are you?" Sun Yanzhou asked.
Zhongyi didn't reply.
"I'll come pick you up," he continued. "President Sun, let me remind you, you already have a girlfriend," Zhongyi said. So what? Was that even a question? How could he be so certain she couldn't resist him, that she'd willingly become the third wheel in his relationship?
Zhongyi sneered.
At that moment, the chauffeur arrived, and she turned off her phone, heading straight back to her rented apartment. The next morning, Zhongyi arrived at the office just on time. The first thing she did was submit her resignation in the company system. She had informed those who needed to know in advance. Since Sun Yanzhou refused to address the situation directly, she would have to handle it by the book. By mid-morning, her resignation still hadn't been approved. Zhongyi checked the status. Sun Yanzhou had viewed it but hadn't submitted it. She wanted to ask him what he meant by this. As if on cue, a message from Sun Yanzhou popped up. "Let's have lunch together? Spicy fish or hot pot?" Zhongyi looked at the screen and thought for a moment. Is this a department farewell meal? Let's wait until after the handover. Sun Yenjo didn't reply. When lunchtime arrived, just as Zhong Yi was about to grab a quick bite, Sun Yenjo appeared in front of her. There's a client meeting. Come with me, he said seriously, tossing her the car keys. My eyes aren't feeling great, so you'll drive. With colleagues watching, Zhong Yi said nothing and followed him out. It wasn't until they were seated in a private room at the hot pot restaurant that she finally couldn't hold back. President Sun, I've already submitted my resignation. I hope you can approve it soon. What's making you leave? The company? Or is it me? Sun Yenjo put down the menu and looked directly at her. What do you think? Outside of work, Zhong Yi didn't want to beat around the bush. I know, maybe in your eyes, female salespeople are seen as easygoing. So even if you have a fiancé, I shouldn't care, she said. I've never thought that, Sun Yenjo tried to explain, but Zhong Yi interrupted him. Regardless of what we were before, you were single then. I'm no moral model, but I don't like getting involved in other people's relationships, even if it's just physical. So, you're determined to leave? Sun Yenjo gave her a long look, then lowered his eyes and chuckled softly, asking a different question instead. How much unpaid commission is still tied to your contracts over the past 2 years? More than 10 million, right? What do you mean? Zhong Yi immediately straightened up. Company policy clearly states that commissions are paid regardless of whether you're still employed once the payments are received. Why are you so anxious? Did I say I wouldn't pay you? Sun Yenjo remained casual. But, the company needs to control costs. Every department is understaffed, and confirming revenue and doing the calculations takes time. Sun Yenjo. Zhong Yi couldn't help but stand up. Is this a threat? Have I ever wronged the company or wronged you? Is it just because money is important to me that you think you can bully me like this? By the time she finished, she couldn't hold back her tears anymore. She wasn't sure if she was crying out of anger or because the words came from the person sitting in front of her. Emotions had been vented. The argument was had, but as long as the commission wasn't fully earned, she was still under the same roof. Having been in sales for so long, Zhong Yi had long since learned how to bend and stretch. That afternoon, she approached Sun Yenjo to apologize, explaining that she had lost control due to a bad mood and hoped he would forgive her this time. She offered to stay and be his right-hand woman. As for that personal connection between them, Zhong Yi took a step back to advance. She candidly admitted that she had indeed fallen for him, which was why she was even more determined not to let him be labeled a scumbag. Perhaps every man enjoys being adored by a beautiful woman, especially when that woman now looked heartbroken over him. Sun Yenjo believed her. I knew you were just jealous, he said, pulling Zhong Yi close. If you really want to revert to a superior-subordinate relationship, I won't force you. But I still have feelings for you, and it's enough that you understand the constraints I'm under. Zhong Yi lowered her eyes, her eyelids slightly reddened. Even she wasn't sure if she was just putting on an act or if she was genuinely upset. Sometimes, Zhong Yi missed the simpler, more straightforward version of herself right after she graduated from college. When she first joined this company, all she had in her sights was money. If she wasn't visiting clients, she was on her way to visit clients. The entire marketing department was initially harmonious, with everyone visiting about 3 or 4 clients a week and landing 1 deal a month. No one had expected that this young girl, standing only a little over 160 centimeters tall, would become such a competitive force, dragging them all into a world of fierce rivalry. Look at Zhong Yi. She's only been here 3 months, hasn't even passed the probation period, and she's already secured a $2 million contract. Shouldn't you all reflect on this? Who's really responsible for the company not meeting its targets? That was what the sales director said, slapping the table as he spoke. So, it was no surprise that Zhong Yi was unpopular. How isolated had they made her? When department meetings were announced, and Zhong Yi wasn't at her desk, not a single person would inform her. When the team went on outings, everyone chatted in pairs or groups of 3, while Zhong Yi walked alone at the back. Even when she was out prospecting and a client came in to sign a contract, she couldn't find a single person willing to help her process the paperwork. Zhong Yi was not immune to feeling hurt, But when the payments came in and the commissions were paid out, and Zhong Sheng had the money for surgery, how others treated her seemed less important to her. Later, Zhong Yi became the top sales performer. In every industry, her network gradually expanded, and her colleagues' attitudes towards her began to soften day by day. After all, sometimes they needed her help in connecting with a client or making introductions. But Zhong Yi knew all of this was superficial. The moment she failed, no one would lift her up. They'd only be ready to kick her while she was down. Then the leadership changed and Sun Yanzhou arrived. To be honest, female sales staff were naturally charmed by his looks, but the men looked down on him, thinking he had secured his position through nepotism. A leader who neither brought in clients nor won over the team was worthless to salespeople. But Zhong Yi thought differently. Since she was going to be used anyway, why not let the person with the most power make use of her? Conveniently, Sun Yanzhou was also eager to build a loyal following, and after observing for a while, he decided no one was more suitable than Zhong Yi. So, it was during some lunch or late-night dinner, at a moment no one could pinpoint, that they found themselves on the same side. At the time, Zhong Yi had never thought there would be any follow-up. Nor did she expect that the follow-up would, at times, make her forget that she only loved money. After leaving Sun Yanzhou's office, Zhong Yi went to the restroom to freshen up her makeup. She didn't return directly to the office, but instead went to the rooftop to bask in the sun for a while. As she opened the rooftop door, she heard voices. Zhong Yi was about to leave when she heard her own name. Sales is already hard enough on the front lines. Why slander her? Besides, Zhong Yi is nothing like what they say. Zhong Yi paused. She couldn't hear what was said in response, but a young man chuckled. Yeah, I do have a crush on her. So what? Haven't you heard the saying, a woman 3 years older is like a gold brick? Back in the office, Zhong Yi was still thinking about who that voice belonged to. Just then, He Chuan from the creative department walked by. She turned her head, and their eyes met for a brief moment. Zhong Yi noticed that the tips of the young man's ears had turned red. The next day, Zhong Yi visited a new client and took He Chuan along. As they were waiting by the elevator, they ran into Sun Yanzhou. It didn't take long before his WeChat message came through. Why take a newbie with you? Isn't the creative department giving you enough resources? Newcomers have drive. Zhong Yi glanced at He Chuan, who was sitting a little stiffly in the passenger seat. Besides, the client's brand is a trendy fashion label. Don't you think He Chuan fits the brand image? You're not just taking him because he's good-looking, are you? Sun Yanzhou texted, then followed up after a pause. Zhong Yi, I'm jealous.
His words were half in jest.
Zhong Yi knew, yet her heart still skipped a beat. Some secret expectations could only be suppressed by reason. When had she started falling for him? Zhong Yi still remembered that night when the client was particularly low-class, touching her thigh and pressuring her to drink. With no other option, Zhong Yi messaged Sun Yanzhou. He arrived quickly, claiming he was also hosting clients at the same restaurant and had heard that her client was there, so he came over to say hello. Given his position, the client had to show some respect. Not to mention, Sun Yanzhou immediately downed 3 drinks as a gesture. After they sent the client off, both of them were a little tipsy. Sun Yanzhou offered to drive her home, but somehow, they ended up in the hotel next door. The chaos of that night left Zhong Yi with one clear memory, Sun Yanzhou gazing into her eyes, calling her name over and over again. The way he looked at her, it was as if she was the only person in the world he cared about. Zhong Yi kept reminding herself not to fall for him, but she sank deeper with each step. They say a woman's waist is like a blade that kills. But what about men? To Zhong Yi, Sun Yanzhou's entire being was a blade, and every cut left a wound. Just like now, he was clearly using the commission to threaten her, yet still whispered sweet words. But what could she do? Women are naturally vengeful, and you shouldn't have messed with her money. Zhong Yi glanced at He Chuan again. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. She hoped it was just her being overly suspicious. 3 months later, Zhong Yi managed to recover most of the payments from her contracts. According to company policy, they should now pay her the full commission. She approached Sun Yanzhou several times about it, but his response was always the same: delay. During this time, Sun Yenjo frequently suggested visiting her clients together. Zhong-yi agreed on the surface, but only took him to meet some minor contacts. She guarded her core resources closely. After all, for salespeople, every connection, especially the core ones, might have been earned through immense effort and hardship. Zhong-yi remembered one time during her period when she found out that a client she had repeatedly failed to meet was swimming at a club. She hurried to a store, bought a box of tampons, and spent an hour swimming with the client. That night, on her way home, her stomach started to hurt so badly that she nearly passed out. For months after, she endured excruciating pain during every period. So, for Sun Yenjo to think he could easily take those resources? No way. Both Zhong-yi and Sun Yenjo understood this. Outwardly, everything remained peaceful, but while she withheld her resources, he delayed her commission. In the end, it would come down to who could hold out longer. Zhong-yi didn't back down. She bought a virtual number through a friend and sent some flirty chat screenshots, mostly messages from Sun Yenjo, to his newlywed wife. Sure enough, 2 hours later, the wife showed up. "Are you Zhong-yi?" The woman pursed her lips, standing before Zhong-yi's desk. "Did you know Sun Yenjo is married?" Zhong-yi nodded nonchalantly. "I couldn't attend, but I did send a wedding gift. Didn't you see it? And you still flirt with him? You knowingly got involved. How low can you get?" Angered by Zhong-yi's calm demeanor, the woman raised her bag and swung it at her. Zhong-yi was prepared and stepped back to avoid it. "Mrs. Sun, I did date Mr. Sun," she admitted bluntly. "But back then, he was publicly single. If you want to know why he pretended to be single and cheated while already having a girlfriend, maybe you should ask him." People nearby were whispering. This was quite the revelation since no one had known about Zhong-yi and Sun Yenjo's relationship. Just then, Sun Yenjo returned to the office. His face changed when he saw the scene. After a brief hesitation, he put on a smile and approached. "Honey, what are you doing here?" Sun Yenjo draped his arm around his wife's shoulder. She shoved him off and pointed at Zhong-yi. "Explain her." Sun Yenjo, of course, denied everything. He half-dragged his wife into his office, hoping to use his usual tricks to smooth things over with her. But Zhong-yi wasn't going to let him get away with it so easily. Under the watchful eyes of their colleagues, she walked up and knocked on Sun Yenjo's office door. "Mr. Sun," she said politely, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I really appreciate you trying to retain me after I submitted my resignation. But if I'm causing you trouble or creating misunderstandings between you two, I think it's best that I leave. Zhong-yi, let's talk later." Sun Yenjo's words were cut off by his wife. "Leave? Would you even want to leave?" His wife's eyes were red with fury. "Is he holding you hostage? If you really wanted to quit, no amount of persuasion could stop you. Let me tell you, Zhong-yi, I've seen plenty of women like you. You know exactly what you're doing. I'm really sorry. I never wanted this." Zhong-yi feigned discomfort, turning to Sun Yenjo. "Mr. Sun, since my contracts have been settled, could you please have the finance department calculate and issue my commission? You'll leave once you get your commission?" The woman eyed Zhong-yi skeptically. She was taller than Zhong-yi, clearly looking down on her. Zhong-yi, playing the innocent victim, cast a pitiful glance at Sun Yenjo and nodded. "If Mr. Sun agrees to release it today, I can leave today. You two talk it over. I'll step outside." With that, Zhong-yi retreated, closing the door behind her, and returned to her desk under the curious gazes of her colleagues. Although there were heated arguments coming from Sun Yenjo's office, the outer room remained calm. Zhong-yi didn't say a word as she quietly packed her things. Finally, about 20 minutes before the end of the workday, she received a notification from her bank. She let out a sigh of relief and, in the next moment, moved her mouse to submit her resignation. Zhong-yi wanted to message Sun Yenjo, but found that he had already blocked her. Was she sad? A little. But the moment she had messaged his wife, she had already prepared herself for all of this. She stood up, gathered her things, and walked out. "Want to skip work and grab a drink with me?" she asked over the phone while waiting for the elevator. "Are you okay?" came the reply. "Just join me for drinks." Zhong-yi chuckled softly. Sure, the other person replied. Are you really leaving? After 2 bottles of beer, He Chuan asked.
Yeah. Zhong Yi's tone was light.
After all this time, I just need a break. He Chuan pressed his lips together. You're unhappy? Not exactly. Zhong Yi opened another bottle. Work isn't about happiness. At first, she hadn't expected things to be so tough. Nor had she expected that she'd manage to overcome one hurdle after another. She really had climbed over those hurdles. Zhong Yi still remembered her first client. With her design background, she had more expertise than the average salesperson when dealing with clients. This gave her the confidence that she could win clients by better understanding their needs. But that wasn't the case. Good ideas were just the foot in the door. If you couldn't handle people, they could easily steal your ideas. This client did just that. Zhong Yi and her creative team burned the midnight oil to produce several versions of a proposal, yet the client remained non-committal. By the time Zhong Yi followed up, the client had already chosen a different partner. Not long after, Zhong Yi saw an ad for the client's company at a bus stop. Aside from changing the font and tweaking a few words, it was basically her team's concept. Only then did she realize the client had never intended to sign with her. They had only wanted her ideas. That's blatant theft. Why didn't you sue them? Hearing this, He Chuan couldn't contain his outrage. What good would that do? Zhong Yi smiled calmly. But you can't just let them get away with it. That's so shameless. Is it? Zhong Yi's smile deepened. What if I told you I later treated him to a few more dinners, drank until I had stomach ulcers? And what if I told you he's now my biggest client, contributing nearly 100,000 in commission each year? Zhong Yi raised her bottle and clinked it against his.
He Chuan was dumbfounded.
Zhong Yi said, So you see, in this world, there are no permanent friends or enemies, only permanent interests. And I only care about interests. No wonder they say. He Chuan trailed off, his expression uneasy. Say what? Say I'll do anything to close the deals. Zhong Yi threw her head back and laughed. I know you're not like that, He Chuan quickly explained. Who can really say? Zhong Yi finished the bottle with a calm expression. Maybe I just haven't been pushed that far yet. Both of them fell silent for a while. What about you and Mr. Sun? He Chuan hesitated before asking, Did you two really? Yeah, Zhong Yi looked at him. Haven't you heard the saying? Everyone's dated a few jerks when they were young. She was still smiling, but He Chuan could sense that, for a brief moment, Zhong Yi wanted to cry. He didn't press further. He simply stayed quietly by her side, drinking with her. In the end, Zhong Yi drank too much, and just before she fell asleep, she finally let out a long-suppressed tear. The next day, the news of Zhong Yi's departure spread. Soon after, several advertising companies reached out to her, some offering lucrative deals. However, Zhong Yi had grown tired of living off commissions. If possible, she would rather be the one holding the reins of power. But that would take time to prepare. So, in many people's eyes, Zhong Yi was indeed on vacation. Her social media was full of snapshots from travels and peaceful afternoon teas. Meanwhile, Sun Yanzhou's life wasn't going so smoothly. First, a brand partnership was about to expire, and when he tried to negotiate a renewal for the following year, the client repeatedly avoided meeting him. Then, a project that Zhong Yi had nearly finalized suddenly fell through at the contract stage. Sun Yanzhou called Zhong Yi. Zhong Yi answered quickly, but remained indifferent when he mentioned the project. Zhong Yi, Sun Yanzhou hesitated before speaking. I don't want to believe you're sabotaging me. After all, Mr. Sun. Zhong Yi cut him off smoothly. You're giving me too much credit. Even though she downplayed it, Sun Yanzhou believed otherwise. The company hadn't changed, the budget hadn't changed, but the clients had. The only variable left was Zhong Yi. Women, no matter how strong, were still women. And regarding Zhong Yi's feelings for him, Sun Yanzhou was confident. That night, he bought her favorite cheesecake from a bakery and waited outside her apartment building. But Zhong Yi never returned. He waited until almost midnight, ready to give up, when a black Bentley pulled up at the gate. The driver opened the rear door, and Zhong Yi stepped out. Mr. Zhang. She turned back, bending slightly to smile at the person inside. I'm really grateful for all your support over the years. I won't say much more, but we'll be working together for a long time, so just watch how I perform. The person inside said something in return, and Zhongyi straightened up, waving her hand. All right, good night. After the goodbye, she walked through the gate when someone approached from the side and grabbed her wrist. Zhongyi. Sun Yanzhou gritted his teeth but still forced a smile. You're back so late? I bought your favorite cake and have been waiting here for hours. Zhongyi shook off his hand. Mr. Sun. She brushed her hair back. I never invited you to wait for me. I came on my own. Is that okay? Sun Yanzhou pushed the cake towards her. You probably don't feel great after drinking. Eating something will help. Zhongyi didn't take it. She stepped back and stood straight under the streetlight, looking at him calmly. If you have something to say, just say it. Zhongyi, does it have to be like this between us? Can't I just want to see you? Sun Yanzhou lowered his gaze, his expression showing a fleeting moment of vulnerability. Zhongyi reminded herself that her past feelings were understandable. After all, this man was truly skilled in matters of the heart. But that was all in the past. It had ended the moment he used her commissions to threaten her. Is this about the 2 contracts? Zhongyi cut to the chase. I've already told you, I don't know why you couldn't secure them, but it has nothing to do with me. Sun Yanzhou scrutinized her. Her tone was cold, and her eyes no longer held the softness they once did. Heh, he chuckled softly and shook his head. I didn't want to say this, but Zhongyi, you forced me. Sun Yanzhou tossed the cake into a nearby trash can. As he did, the warmth he had been projecting disappeared, and his gaze turned sharp. That guy just now, he's one of the company's clients, right? You've already quit, but you're still entangled with the company's clients. Don't flatter yourself. I haven't overestimated you. You've really mastered playing the gender-advantaged card. Whether it's a man in his 50s or 60s, as long as they're male, they all fall for your charms. Sun Yanzhou, what are you trying to say? Zhongyi's voice rose. I'm saying, why do they ignore the company and only care about you, the sales manager? Sun Yanzhou loosened his tie. I'll be blunt, Zhongyi. If you keep messing with me, don't blame me for not playing nice. I've made a lot of sacrifices over the past year. And you. Who knows how many men have slept with you? Disgusting. Sun Yanzhou, you bastard. Zhongyi couldn't hold back any longer and slapped him hard across the face. Even though her chest felt like it was about to explode with pain, Zhongyi had no interest in defending herself. She had simply loved the wrong person, but that didn't mean she had to degrade herself. Besides, she had a long road ahead. Right and wrong would be proven by her capabilities in the future. Just as Zhongyi hadn't expected, a set of photos quickly circulated in their circle, capturing the moment she got out of the car to say goodbye. There were also some malicious rumors. Although the friend who leaked the information to Zhongyi didn't speak up, she could guess what they were about. Zhongyi never intended to target Sun Yanzhou. As a salesperson, her principle has always been to part ways amicably whenever possible. Only maintaining positive relationships could bring benefits, just like how a client who once plagiarized her ideas eventually became her client. But this time was different. Sun Yanzhou wanted client resources, right? Fine, she would give them to him. Zhongyi arranged to meet Sun Yanzhou. You clearly know that besides you, I haven't been with any other men, yet you still bully me like this. She cried, feeling wronged. I'm sorry, it's all my fault. Sun Yanzhou comforted Zhongyi, gently patting her shoulder. Seeing you come back with another man drove me crazy with jealousy. Can you please understand me a little? He tenderly wiped her tears, and she didn't resist leaning into his embrace. It felt as if everything that had happened in the past few weeks had never occurred. They were still the same as before, secretive yet passionate. Except that sometimes, Zhongyi would be sickened by Sun Yanzhou's lines. Later, Sun Yanzhou deleted the posts he made, and Zhongyi kept her promise, taking him to visit her most important client. That client's company was launching a new product, and who would handle the advertising was still undecided. They originally hadn't considered Zhu Sheng, but with Zhongyi's help, Sun Yanzhou ultimately secured the project invitation. Zhongyi, you're truly my treasure girl. Sun Yanzhou gazed at her with deep affection. You always manage to surprise me. I can give you even more surprises. Zhongyi winked playfully. What else? Sun Yanzhou leaned closer. You'll find out later. Zhongyi dodged, still smiling brightly. It will definitely catch you off guard. Sun Yanzhou certainly didn't expect to see Zhongyi at the project presentation site. What are you doing here? The moment he asked this question, an ominous premonition surged within him, especially upon seeing He Chuan standing behind Zhongyi. Sorry, I forgot to tell you, Mr. Sunday. Zhongyi signed the attendance sheet before turning to Sun Yanzhou. Our company has also received the project invitation. Your company? Which one? Sun Yanzhou was puzzled, his gaze shifting between her and He Chuan. He remembered that this boy had just left Ju Xing not long ago. As for how he ended up with Zhongyi, Sun Yanzhou had no clue. Sanxiang, Zhongyi said. A small company that was just established. I hope Mr. Sun will take care of us in the future. Sun Yanzhou was taken aback. A couple of days ago, someone mentioned this company to him, saying it was backed by a mysterious overseas investor, and they were making waves, having landed an annual promotion contract with an international luxury goods group for their first project. What position are you holding over there? Sun Yanzhou asked. Zhong is a partner in our company, He Chuan said slowly after a long pause. Partner? Sun Yanzhou still found it hard to believe since Zhongyi hadn't mentioned this to him. They had been interacting daily on WeChat, so how could this have slipped past him? For some reason, Sun Yanzhou felt that Zhongyi had come this time with a target on him. Sure enough, during the presentation, once he entered, he was bombarded with various questions, from creative concepts to event organization and budgets, all very detailed. Sun Yanzhou was not good at these. He had risen to his position through connections, relying on those same connections. So he kept casting meaningful glances at the client representative he had previously befriended, but the other party remained unresponsive, as if deep in meditation. Then it was Zhongyi's turn to present. Sun Yanzhou waited in the hallway, and it wasn't until an hour later that Zhongyi walked out, wearing a smile. Zhongyi, what's the meaning of this? He pulled her into a safe passage, questioning her harshly. What do you mean? Is it hard to understand? Zhongyi chuckled lightly. Don't you look down on me? Haven't you been slandering me everywhere? Sun Yanzhou, I'm giving you a fair chance to compete with me, but if you actually lose to a woman who only knows how to leverage her gender, I hope you'll be gracious enough to accept defeat. With that, she shrugged off his hand and walked away, head held high. A week later, the bidding results were announced, and it was indeed Zhongyi representing Sanxiang that won. Sun Yanzhou was scolded by the general manager, and he tried to attribute his loss to the client's pre-selection, claiming it wasn't his fault for not doing well enough. However, the slap in the face came quickly. Zhongyi's company won an advertising award, and the client also signed over their entire annual advertising campaign to her. Even with Mr. Sun personally in charge, he still got played. The sales team mocked him behind his back. Even those supporting him were subtly reminding him that such results would make it hard to maintain his position. Later, Sun Yanzhou went through some trouble to find out that Zhongyi's main planner was actually He Chuan. He Chuan had participated in world-class advertising awards even before graduating from university and had won prizes. However, his parents valued the stability of state-owned enterprises and had forced him into Ju Xing. What surprised Sun Yanzhou even more was that the so-called mysterious overseas investor backing Zhongyi turned out to be He Chuan's aunt, a top investor on Wall Street. Sun Yanzhou recalled that time when he saw Zhongyi bring He Chuan to meet a client, asking her if she was attracted to that handsome boy. Analyzing the situation now, Zhongyi had likely been aware of all this from the beginning, and everything she did was to prepare for today. So, do you think I'm using you? At the same time, still in that bar, Zhongyi lowered her eyelashes and asked He Chuan, who sat across from her. He Chuan paused, then clinked his bottle with hers. But rather than letting you use someone else, why not use me? Why? Zhongyi asked. Don't you know? He Chuan countered. Zhongyi fell silent. If she were to be honest, He Chuan was quite good. But maybe because of her own weariness, she found love exhausting. It was better to focus on making money. The shares I promised to give you are already drafted in the agreement. I'll send it to you later, and you can have your lawyer look it over, Zhongyi said nonchalantly. He Chuan didn't refuse. He didn't know how long he would like this woman sitting across from him, but for now, he liked her. So while he still liked her, he thought it best to do something emotional and not let youth and passion go to waste. As for if one day that feeling faded, at least the shares would serve as compensation. After all, they were all just ordinary people. Could they truly be so unbothered by gains and losses?